First off, I'm going to let you, Emily, and Jon introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to toss it over to Ryan to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Prospector, geologist by background. Jon, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders as well, and I'm our CTO and COO of the company. So looking forward to chatting today, Jess.
I'm Ryan Sistad. I'm the executive director of Better in Our Backyard. We promote responsible industrial development out of northern Minnesota with an upper Midwest focus. So our niche is promoting certain projects in northeastern Minnesota, mining projects, and then we also represent a mining company out of Idaho. And then also too, we help out Enbridge with some Line 5 advocacy efforts in Michigan and Wisconsin.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. And for those of you that don't know, Ryan has been a guest on the On the Rocks podcast before, so we're excited to have him on the live stream today, and be sure to check out his podcast episode. So today, I know we have a topic of discussion that a lot of people have a lot of very strong feelings on. We're going to be discussing NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard, is kind of a slang term for that. So we talk a lot about mining data with the Prospector team and making it easier to understand, and how that relates to better knowledge and bringing better investments into mining projects. And that kind of relates to NIMBYism that way. But first, I thought we'd kind of discuss what is NIMBYism and what comes to your guys' minds when you think about NIMBYism in the mining industry. Tough question, I know.
I grew up in Maine. So actually the way I think of NIMBYism is from growing up in the part of the state of Maine where there's a huge lumber industry or used to be. It was seeing bumper stickers on the back of cars and trucks that said, if you don't like the timber industry, then don't use toilet paper, right? So to me, that kind of sums up NIMBYism, where it's okay, you have all of these products and things that you use every day, but you don't want that industry to be in your community because you perceive it as bad for the environment or dirty or just an undesirable industry, even though you need all the stuff that it makes. You just don't want to see it. That's Emily's growing up relatable story to NIMBYism.
And to build on Emily's point, which I agree with, by the way, is what first got me originally interested in this topic was the NIMBYism in itself, because in Minnesota especially, and I would argue that this is pretty normal across the country, is that we have a lot of local politicians, both on local level, state level, and federal level, representing Minnesota, that constantly push for clean energy technologies, but they're not wanting to publicly support some of the projects that would supplement the minerals needed for those clean energy technologies. And so when I think of NIMBYism, that's one of the first things that I think of are some of the folks that support the clean energy transition, but do not want to mine the minerals in their backyard.
Awesome. Great. Jon, any additional input there?
When I hear NIMBYism, I think a lot about mining, but the natural thing I think for most people is going to be housing, right? I think that when we hear the word NIMBYism, we think of housing, and a lot of folks may support a lot of initiatives, but they don't want it close to them, right? And I think that this is and there's a lot of history, particularly in the U.S., of the results of those kind of policies resulting in a lot of disproportionate effects of different minority groups. And I think that this kind of relates to mining as well, right? Look at the geology of Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Look at how many, if you were to go into Prospector and you were to look at a map, and you were to look at all the mines and projects in those provinces in Canada, and then take a look at New England, take a look at New York. There's not a lot of mines.
Geology just stops at the border.
Yeah, and so it's this question of, right, it's getting back to, right, if we need materials, right, and is it really better to mine things in places like the Congo and West Africa, where there's, we always know there's labor issues, we know there's environmental issues that just don't get taken into account, to a mine that's going to be producing in the US, right, where those standards are much higher. We know that the minerals are probably going to be in a much better supply chain, right? There's not going to be all these other things that we worry about, like, for instance, things with conflict diamonds. so it's the question of, okay, well, you want to solve those problems, but you don't want it close to you. It's not necessarily, and it's not black or white, but it is something that we all need to consider, right? So if that's going to, thanks for bringing up the map, Jess. And,
yeah, it's a pretty dramatic visual, actually.
And yeah, and
showing me that at PDAC, Emily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, if you think about it, if you look in Maine, none of those mines will get built. I mean, there's Maine's just passed a mineral law. As things stand now, they won't build those mines in Maine, and there's a lot of resistance to it. And to be frank, they're not. It's just the nature of the politics around things, and changing that and changing the mindset, I think, is going to take a lot for a lot of people, especially given the long tail it takes to bring a mine into production.
Yeah, but it's amazing how different just like the cultural reaction to mining can be in communities that are so geographically close to each other, right? I mean, because, I think people would think that culturally, in terms of receptiveness to the industry, that you'd be similar in those areas, like right across the border. Canada and the US, people don't really think of as being so different. But when it comes to this industry, they are really, really different in how people perceive it and whether they welcome it coming into their area.
Those are all great points, you guys. Definitely appreciate that. I'm going to take a minute really quick to pull up this poll. It's a Mentimeter poll. And so we recently had a poll on the Weekly Nugget talking about what potential causes of NIMBYism could be. And as you guys said, a lot of this is a global concept. This isn't just the mining industry that we're seeing this in. And of course, for the Weekly Nugget, our responses were 56% environmental concerns, 6% ethical concerns in the boom and bust commodity cycle, 25% industry perception, and 6% not enough community involvement. So looking at those kind of concerns as what we're thinking causes NIMBYism versus what is actually causing NIMBYism, do you guys have any thoughts on how to address those concerns, or are we addressing the right concerns, anything like that?
I think it's unfortunately such a chicken or the egg type of problem, because it's like until people are more familiar with like a mining operation, a mining company, until they know people that work in the industry, I think all of those concerns are really hard to mitigate, right? Like if you never interact with it, it can remain really scary and unknown. So it's like, how do you introduce the industry into areas where we're not present in order to kind of shift that perception? Again, I don't have a great answer for that, but I just think to acknowledge, like, it's always hard to get people to welcome something that they've never had to interact with or be around before, right? Especially when it comes to like environmental concerns. I think, if you don't know the people that are working at a mine or running a tailings facility, it can, it's incredibly scary to think about.
And I also, and to add to Emily's point too, just from both the community and environmental perspective, and this isn't data or any stats, but one thing that I think is an underrated thing to do too is, there's 2 projects or 3 projects in Minnesota that we do a lot of communications or advocacy work for, and that's Talon Metals, New Range Copper Nickels North Med project, and Twin Metals. And but a lot of people really don't, I would argue, don't realize, especially from the cities area, that many of the folks that are working at Talon or working at Twin, working at New Range, are actually from the area. They live in the area. So if anything gets messed up environmentally, or if there's any type of mistake happening, they got to face it with their community. So they don't. I mean, obviously they're going to adhere to best environmental standards, best practices, because they got to answer to their colleagues in the area, and that's where they live. They don't want anything bad to happen to their local environment.
I think there's also, just for the general public, I think there's a perception issue as well, right? I don't know that there's a lot of communication that goes on about all the things that have improved in the last 30 or 40 years and how we mine things and all the techniques. Like there's all this technology now, and like with carbon sequestration and tailings out there, that I would guess that most people, when they hear a mine, don't think that that's a possibility, right? And so getting that kind of message out, and I think it also gets back to, and it's a two-way street, right? When a company puts out a planned project, right, that project's going to be well planned and it's going to be done well. I think that's something that we see all the time in technical reports. right? Is it a good technical report, a thoughtful First Nations engagement, a thoughtful environmental plan, right? Getting really into the details of things matters, right? And it matters on what's going to be brought into production. You know, when you look at the legal legislation going on right now with Thacker Pass, you know, could that have been avoided, right? with slightly different plannings of how that mine was going to be implemented, right? Rather than just moving forward and doing it, and now it ending up in the courts, right? So, that I think that's a big component of this, and just general public education, but also on like getting more into how we plan mines and what we're going to do for these mitigation strategies.
I think also, I can't remember who it was that pointed this out, but it stuck with me for a while. Like when pharmaceutical companies are talking about what they do and what they bring to society, like they don't show pictures of factories making drugs, right? Like when like chemical product companies are communicating about the value they bring to society or their products, like they don't show like piles of chemicals being put into vats and turned into stuff. And yet in the mining industry, like almost every company website, it might have been Hayden that said this at Geologize. Like when you go to the company websites, you see pictures of big pits, which I love. Like I love to look at pictures of open pit mines or underground stuff, you know what I mean? But it's like there's this focus on the point of extraction in terms of like how we kind of communicate what we do, as opposed to like what our industry actually ends up producing, like the actual products that all of this stuff goes into. And I think focusing on that point of extraction, while again, I think it's really cool and it's certainly transparent and it's accurate to show that, right? I don't think it goes to Jon's point of like kind of getting to that perception issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that kind of leads into what I was thinking of as the next kind of topic here is how do we discuss NIMBYism? Because I know in the industry we see a lot of headlines like these that are NIMBYism is a threat, and we're blaming all the NIMBYism and stuff on, the permitting and stuff. It's taking forever. And we're kind of coming off in a threatening way instead of a addressing concerns way. At least that's how I see it. Yeah. So I thought it might be cool to kind of go over some pros and cons of having mines near you and addressing public concerns, addressing these kind of NIMBYism.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point that it's, you don't change anybody's, well, I mean, I guess you do change people's minds by threatening them about certain topics, but it's not the way we want to change people's minds, right? I mean, to me, the first thing that always comes to mind is jobs. And again, I think to what some of the points we've been talking about, they're actually really different jobs than I think people expect there to be at a mine, right? They're much more higher tech, they're higher pay, certainly than I think most people would expect. They're safer jobs. And there's a wide range of jobs in a mine or at an exploration project even, right? Like it really runs the gamut. So that's what comes to mind for me is like the number one reason why you want a mine in your backyard is really high quality, safe, and long-term and enduring jobs for your community.
And then to add to Emily's point again, like also too understanding that, let's say if you're driving around a Tesla or driving around any EVs or you're seeing a wind turbine go up, that there's a greater chance that the minerals that were sourced were ethically sourced, to the points that were made earlier about Congo, that it's not the cobalt and EV batteries are not being dug up by a child in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's a good chance that it's coming from here in the US or Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of making that point. Like if you care about environmental and health and safety standards, you should want these projects to be developed in the countries that have really strong standards and regulation around them, right? Otherwise it gets pushed off to places where they have so many fewer resources to make sure that the projects are built safely and sustainably.
And also too, I mean, a lot of times, like in the mine with the mining industry, if that becomes stronger in a certain region, there's a lot of spin-off effect to that too. I mean, you might have entrepreneurs come in from different regions to want to open up a sandwich shop or open up, there might be some other industries that might come in to complement a strengthening of the mining industry in the region. Like, I know like in my region, we've experienced heavy population drops in the past 40 years, and there's a correlation with with a decrease in mining jobs in the region too. And so, when I'm thinking about more mining jobs in the area or like in a certain region, you're also strengthening that region and local communities, even not just within the mining industry.
Yeah, and I think just getting kind of like adding to that a bit, with the current passing of the CHIPS Act, right? There's going to be a ton of investment. There is a ton of investment coming in for new chip factories all over the U.S. Right? This is going to be a big focus point. But at the end of the day, those supply chains are going to be reliant on metal that's largely outside of the country at the moment. You think about, I think it was Rio Tinto put a report out like 2 or 3 years ago. The biggest like shortage metal is tin, right? And if you go look at how a tin mine looks in Southeast Asia, and you tell me whether that's a good or bad thing for it, because that's what's going to go in. You need that for circuit boards, right? So, what are we going to do about tin? If we're not having enough exploration that's being done, or we're not putting enough effort into, even if we are going to mine in those locations, finding ways to do that in a way that's less impactful, so that when it is in someone else's backyard, it's the same as if it was in your backyard, right?
Right.
I mean, how do we maybe there's a degree of a stick here, not just a carrot, where, if you're going to have these things, maybe there needs to be a way to make it more apparent that someone else has experienced that pain, even though you may not be.
Yeah, the global citizen approach, as opposed to, really, with how interconnected the world is, and I think everyone sees this more and more every day. In reality, anybody's backyard is our backyard at this point, right? That's just how interconnected we are globally. And so to your point, Jon, it should be about how do we have global standards for this, for sure. I'm just so excited by all the engagement. I'm like trying to read all the comments. So this is awesome. Hi, everybody. Well, and I think another big benefit and maybe Ryan, maybe you've got some stats for this. I don't know what it is, but what about local tax base, and there must also be an increase in kind of the resources that come into a community from a tax perspective and an infrastructure perspective when these mines get built.
It's a good question. The best, and I'm going off of stats that I haven't read in months, but the main, in terms of, there was a comment on here that asked about the spinoff effect, and I would say a good rule of thumb is at least a 2 minimum spinoff for jobs off of the direct employment. Some argue more. I've heard some people on the range say up to 5. And then in terms of tax revenues, I know I can't speak for some of the other projects specifically right offhand, especially as Talon is discovering more nickel, it seems like every other week. But with like the North Met project, for example, I believe the last time I checked, it's roughly $450 million a year in terms of annual economic impact, which was, don't quote me on that, even though we're live, but I think that was the last study that was done by the University of Minnesota Duluth. That's what they came to. And then another stat that they like to use of North Met too is that the annual economic impact is similar to what US Bank Stadium brought in for the Super Bowl when Minnesota hosted the Super Bowl. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. It's like one Super Bowl for Northeastern Minnesota every year with North Met running.
That's an amazing corollary. Because that just drives home kind of the picture in terms of, obviously the Super Bowl is a huge economic driver. For all of our international listeners, that may not be as much of a crazy thing, but I guess it would be like the World Cup every year, kind of same.
Yeah, exactly. And even from like a construction perspective, I think US Bank Stadium was a little over $1 billion to construct, $1.5 billion. And that's generally, you probably need to start out with a minimum of $1 billion to build a new copper nickel mine in northeastern Minnesota too. So from a construction perspective, it's, that there's another similar angle there too. And it's not in an urban area, it's in a rural area. So the economic impact, I would argue, would be felt a lot quicker, or it'd be a lot more obvious than it would be in an urban area.
Yeah. And I know some of the stuff I've seen in terms of like benefits people don't think about is just like companies pulling in like high quality internet, like that type of infrastructure that allows schools to have better services, businesses to then thrive off of like better internet services and, stuff like that. Like that, again, companies pull it in because they need it, but everybody benefits once it's there. Power infrastructure, similarly, water infrastructure, to make sure that it's, all of that stuff, it's hard to kind of put in front of people's faces, but it really, it adds up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I believe it was last year, there was an iron mining company out of this area that donated enough money to a local school to build a brand new gym.
Yeah, those are, and I like the thought of like the internet and the power structures. I know on our podcast with Alicia Eastman, we were talking about mining companies and the potential to bring in like hydrogen energy, if I remember right. And those are lasting power structures. Like that infrastructure lasts long after the mine is gone and benefits the community long after the mine is gone.
Well, that's where I think there's some really cool models out there that some companies are approaching. And one that I know I've got friends working there, so it's not like a promotional thing, just a shout out, like our friends at Bunker Hill. I'm a big fan of how part of their approach has been to look at what businesses can come in while the mine is being restarted and expanded that will be there way past the life of the mine. And how do you integrate that into the business plan for the mine itself, right? Like, so the concern about, okay, well, what happens once the mine is mined out and there's no more resources here? We're going to be, stuck with a tailings facility and, no jobs anymore, right? It's only going to get us 10 or 20 years. So how can companies change that in their business model approach, right? To focus on that from the beginning, as opposed to thinking about it when it's time to start shutting a mine down, I think also might help kind of shift the perceptions.
For sure. So that leads me into this next portion here. Jon did some awesome work with our data and kind of talking about project stages and life of mine plans. And so globally, I have some fun stats here. 39.7 of our global projects in our database are in the grassroots stage, which is shocking to me.
Yeah. 39.7.
39.7. Only 3.9% of the global projects are in the PEA stage. 3% of projects are in the permitting and feasibility stage. Less than 1% of projects globally in our database are in the construction stage. And 8.5% of the projects in our global database are current producers. So taking a look and thinking about, okay, not every grassroots mine is going to become a project, right? Like that's the reality of it. It's not always going to become a mine. But how does NIMBYism and better incorporating with our communities, how does this affect these project stages? Any thoughts on that, you guys?
I think you see a lot of projects stall somewhere between that PEA and construction phase. Because a large times that's like the PEA is when you get the life of mine plan that comes out, and that's usually when you get the opposition to some sort of permitting or the government revokes something, right? I think that's, those are, that's why you would, I guess, so I suppose you would expect them, because you've moved beyond drilling holes, right? You've moved into, I actually want to do something here. And there's now whatever political lobby is going to be there. If you've not done that well, they're likely going to be pretty effective at, blocking you in that case. But the Wolfton mine in Maine, I think, is going to fall victim to that, the way things seem to be going. So yeah, that's my thought.
I was just going to say, I just taped a podcast this morning, so a sneak peek of when we restart on the rocks. We'll have an episode coming out with Charlie Johnson of the BHP Explorer program. But we were talking about how the business models of the major mining industries really impact risk tolerance and how projects get funded. And I think when I look at this, that's what this tells me, because once you get into that, kind of construction through production phase, you're seeing more of that being done by larger companies, right? As opposed to the risk of most of those, 3,000 projects in the grassroots stage. Those are juniors. Those are small companies that are taking a huge amount of risk. And I think if we could encourage in lots of different ways to get the major mining companies and the mid-tiers to invest more in exploration or work closer in partnership with the companies and the teams that are doing the early stage exploration, I think we would start to see a higher percentage of the funnel move into those later stages, because it's just so hard for a small company to shoulder like the legal and regulatory cost, right? There's a whole bunch of other reasons why, but once you get into that, I mean, most of those early stage companies are looking at eventual acquisition. That's the reality of, hey, I hit it big, I found a discovery, I'm going to sell it to somebody who can pay for all the legal and regulatory costs of developing it. And I think until we get some alternative business models into the industry, I think it's going to be really challenging to kind of increase how many projects make it through the funnel, because it's just stale. The business model and the pipeline mechanisms, they're just stale and they aren't working in order to get us the number of discoveries that we're going to need and projects to be developed.
That's a great point. Yeah. And all I was going to say earlier, John, was I was going to mention permitting. So in terms of stages that it got delayed, and then Emily, you just pointed out a perspective that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, because I think, the NIMBYism too, this is where we'll call to action if we've got any majors, folks working with the majors on the line here. I think this is also where there's an opportunity for the bigger companies to work closer together on the marketing and communication about the industry, right? Because again, it's hard for smaller companies to kind of represent the mining industry, even if they might be the only company that local community has ever met. But if we could get more collaboration from the big companies on the marketing of the industry as a whole, I would hope that would shift some of the NIMBYism that you even see really at the local level.
And just kind of dovetailing on that a bit, I think a lot about, because I think there's been a lot here about skill gaps in the mining industry and how to engage locally and training folks to engage the local community. We are largely seeing a lot of geology departments and others getting subsumed into the environmental science departments, right? I think that's the general trend of the way the academic curricula is going. And that may not be, that doesn't have to be like a thing that's like, oh no, there's any less people going into strict mining engineering or strict geology. Is maybe that's an opportunity to actually fold these kind of concepts into the curriculum, where you're actually developing people that are going into degrees, maybe on like it's in some sort of like natural resource engineering type degree, more broadly defined, that incorporates those kind of policy things into the curriculum. So while we may not be doing strict mining engineering degrees directly in a lot of universities, right, and that, or at least that's the way it seems to go, there is an opportunity to kind of change that. Okay, well, if that's the status quo, what's going to happen? Is there an opportunity to now put more mining into those environmental science degrees, or provide more opportunities into like more engineering type focus, or like at least subsets in that to encourage more participation? Because I think if you fold that around together, I think it's an attractive degree, and it really creates a more well-rounded individual that's going to be more prepared to deal with these sort of issues.
Yeah, and I can't speak to the engineering side, but I think unfortunately, like geology, like I don't know why geology has become like a bad word. Like even my alma mater, Bowdoin College, love it to death. John and I have an intense rivalry because our alma maters are kind of love-hate relationship between Colby and Bowdoin. But like, they changed the name of the department, which I get it, but like, why is geology a bad thing now? Like, you need geology for environmental studies, for all kinds of things that are not related to mining at all. And I think there is so much to be said, to your point, about the curriculum, right, and how it ties in with all these other issues. And I see folks commenting about, getting more kind of geology or resource related curriculum in at the elementary school level, which is a pet like thing for me, because my daughter is 7 and she loves rocks, and all of her friends love rocks, and they all go straight to the aisle in Whole Foods with all the crystals, and they all they love that stuff. So it is there in kids, and they love heavy equipment, they love dump trucks, they love drones, they love all the things that we use in the industry. And yet there's like this nosedive of focus on kind of natural resource science in the elementary school curriculum, that I think we miss them at that point where they're just so excited about rocks. Because I find them in the washing machine all the time. They find their way into little pockets. And then you're like, is the washing machine breaking? What's going on? And there's like a whole bunch of pebbles that come out. So
story of my life. I saw on it's.
I say, speaking of, yeah.
Yeah, I saw on Instagram today the cutest photo, and it was a bunch of like 4-year-olds up next to a haul truck tire, and they had the cute like little safety vest and hard hat on. I'm like, that's when we need to be getting them, and it was the cutest photo.
Well, I don't know if this is still the case, but for several, I mean, we used to bring Madeline, our daughter, with us to PDAC every year. She would come up to Toronto, and she would be there with our babysitter, but we weren't allowed to bring her on the floor. And like, I know that PDAC has stringent safety standards. We got yelled at multiple times last year because our booth wall exceeded the height threshold by, if Susan is out there from the PDAC booth management team, we're still sorry, but like, so I know there are strict safety standards about everything around PDAC, but I wish we could get like little kids access to the show for part of it. I think that would be awesome. I know we get like teenagers and stuff, but okay. So Peggy brought her daughter at 12. So maybe there was an age limit, but I know they wouldn't let me bring her in because of insurance or something. Maybe I'll just sneak her in next time.
Hey, it's what is it? What's the phrase? Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
I know. Yeah. I don't want to scar her. Like, Mommy, that one time you got me kicked out of a mining conference.
Yeah, just to remember, Prospector is not liable for any advice given here. If you decide to sneak your children in.
Oh, 8. Okay, maybe it was just everyone's encouraging it.
We're gonna not be allowed at PDAC anymore.
That our booth has been denied again, rejected. Yeah, we'll live stream it next year, sneaking Madeline into PDAC. Yeah.
Okay, swinging us back on track here a little bit because we are running a little short on time.
And off track.
Right, yeah. Now we're just encouraging bad habits. We don't want to do that. So back to the project stages. Jon just pulled some really cool data this morning about life of mine and a look at it like globally. So globally, projects in the production stage globally have an average 15 years of estimated life of mine. And on average, from discovery to production, mining projects take approximately 15.7 years. Now, I know 10 years was kind of the standard for like the gold mines that we heard for a long time, but this is on a 2023 study, 15.7 years from discovery to production. So thinking about NIMBYism and all the troubles we have permitting and stuff like that, do we have enough projects in the pipeline? How do we better work within our communities to bring these projects online and kind of overcome that NIMBYism step? What are your guys' thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the data definitely shows, in general, we don't have enough projects in the pipeline to meet the metal demand for the world, right? Looking ahead for the next several decades. So even if you were to take NIMBYism out, gosh, even if we were to reduce that by half, I still don't think we'd be hitting what we need to be doing in the next 10 years. I mean, that's a long time, right? I mean, gosh, I think about 15 years, that's a long time to bring a project into development, because technology and everything is going to be so dramatically different in 15 years too, which is what I always get concerned about. Everyone's focused right now on electric vehicles and battery technology. That is going to be so different in a decade from what it is now. We don't even know what minerals we're going to need for that type of technology in 10 years, right? Like, so if we don't figure it out, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball.
I think it's what's so difficult, right? The cycle is so long, right? Because you're talking about, 15 years ago to bring something online. And I think a lot of times it depends on the metal, right? Do I think we have too many gold projects in the world? Yes.
Why you got to go picking on gold, Jon?
Well, I'm just saying, outside of providing a reserved currency, there are a lot of other metals that are probably more important to society that we could probably, they shouldn't be taking up like a third of the projects globally, right?
Is that what they are?
It's something like that. It's something, yeah, of all the publicly traded projects, it's probably between 30 and 40% are gold. Yeah. And so, if that's the man, I guess what is just always
Jon, you're going to get so much hate mail for that. From, like, all of our investor subscribers.
But I think about like you're talking about, Emily, though, like the lithium ion battery, right? That is, I mean, it's not just a mining problem; it's also a processing problem. Because even if we bring on all the lithium mines that would supply the production, the processing still is going to have to catch up for that. And maybe there's no lithium battery in 15 years. It's really important. There's something else. Maybe we invented helium cells or fusion or something else that's going to require an entirely different mineral, right? So
because you know what nobody wants more than a copper mine is a copper smelter in their backyard.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's a great point, Jon. It's like, yeah, you get it out of the ground, it's got to be processed somewhere. And their NIMBYism issues are even huger around processing for metals than they are for mining them.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, look at something like uranium. The U.S. has been trying to bring on uranium plants back on, and we literally don't have enough welders to build uranium-grade processing plants, right? Mm-hmm. to do the actual power plants. And then there was a project in like somewhere in Georgia, I think it went it's like 3 times over budget, and they still, because we've not been training welders, because we shut down all of those power plants back in the 80s. And we never reskilled anyone, and we've actually sucked a lot of people out of, not hard labor, but like more manual labor, things like welders that we actually need. We're going to need a lot of going forward. And there's a need to kind of address that concern, right? If we're going to be able to address these things on top of just the mining.
Alex says take all the gold and bankroll the critical minerals with it. Good idea, Alex. I like it.
And to the points too earlier, I can't say offhand if we have enough projects to cover the critical mineral demand or battery metals for the EV transition, but we do have projects that are, the NorthMet project out of northeastern Minnesota, that was fully permitted 5 years ago, and it's still stuck in litigation. We got projects in Arizona, we got projects in Alaska that are pretty close to production. So we can't necessarily really cover the increase in demand in the U.S. domestically, but we certainly can start strengthening supply chains here at home too, though, to help cover some of that increase. And then, but to the point earlier too, regarding smelters and refining, that's a really underrated topic, because as we're increasing domestic production, we also should be looking at increasing our refining capacities as well.
Yeah, because you want to look at carbon footprint. You keep shipping stuff to Indonesia or China for processing after you mine it in the US and then bring it back as a finished product. Like the biggest part of the carbon footprint of the mineral industry is shipping raw material across oceans, right? It's incredibly dirty. And it's important, right? It's a critical part of what we do right now. But if people want to make a big impact, if you can reduce the transportation of raw material, it makes a tremendous decrease in the carbon footprint. And we have another On the Rocks episode, right, where we talked about that with construction materials, with aggregate. Jess, you can probably reference the episode better than I can, but when you look at just aggregate, people don't want aggregate mines in their communities. And yet that is literally what you use to build buildings, build roads, build everything we kind of live and work in. And there's a huge impact just in that, if you would kind of allow aggregate mining to happen closer to, there we go, Chris Summers from Burgess. Yeah. If people would just be more supportive of aggregate being closer to their communities, you would have huge environmental benefits.
Absolutely. Cool. So, gosh, we have so many comments to kind of go through. So just any final thoughts while I'm picking some comments here to kind of discuss on anything that you guys want to say that we didn't get a chance to cover or anything like that?
I do think, one thing, there's a lot of talk about ESG, and I think what is a really positive thing is you're seeing a lot of the producers. I think nearly every producer now produces an ESG report. I do think that globally, that I don't know if it's particular to that, but you'll notice that they're not really all consistent on what they report on. They typically report on things that they are good at within that ESG realm. And I think that getting to some standards on this, it would be helpful, because I think it would permeate through project planning and move down towards the juniors, because knowing that you're a junior, you're going to get acquired by a company that's going to have to adhere to these kind of standards may entice you for future acquisition to handle more of this planning as you're trying to, drill holes, build out a resource, put that PEA together.
I would recommend mine tours. I think, and Jess, I know you're a big fan. I honestly think if more companies like made a point of offering like community mine tours, schools to come in and see mines, or even processing facilities, whatever in the industry in your community looks like inviting the community in to see what the physical facility, see the people working there. I think it makes such a huge impact, and I kind of think of it as like the Fred Rogers effect. I might be showing my age, but with Mr. Rogers, he used to always have these little clips of like going behind the scenes of how things were made. John, I know you remember this, right? You go to the crayon factory and see how crayons are made, and see how the shoe factory works. And I think if companies did more of that within their local communities, it would make things real and less scary, and really be a positive interaction. And if you're an early stage project, great, invite people to come out to the site and talk to your geologists and let them show you all the rocks that they're super excited about, right? And how much they know about the local biodiversity and what they're doing to protect it. I think we oftentimes try to keep people at arm's length because we're scared that they're going to have a negative reaction, instead of encourage them to come in because we're confident that we can collaborate and we can explain what we're doing and why it's a good thing.
Yeah, I have a huge love of mine tours and stuff too. And I saw Big Rock Exploration, I think it was, on LinkedIn recently. They were doing beers with a geologist, and at a local brewery, they had their core and stuff set up. And I love that. And I think, of course, I worked for the World Museum of Mining for a while as a mine tour guide. And talking about incorporating with your local communities and stuff, there are so many global mining museums around. And now, granted, a lot of them are historic, but they are such an opportunity to really teach people about the mining industry and what it was versus how it is now. And I think that's an opportunity that a lot of people don't really think about. So mining companies, work with your local mining museums. There's my soapbox on that.
Well, and that does make me think of one other thing, universities that do still have geology departments and have phenomenal specimen collections. I think that's something else that is really underutilized from an educational perspective. You go into some departments and they've got phenomenal rock specimens everywhere, and they're shoved in a closet and nobody ever sees them. And another shout out to my alma mater, Bowdoin, they did when they built the new environmental and oceanographic science studies. They've got the rock samples from the old geology department lining all of the hallways. And they just look so cool. And you've just got to think if a few students every day just stop and look at those samples and oh, what's that? And Google it to see what it's used for. All of that kind of stuff has impact, right? Just by putting the cool parts of the industry forward. So let students come in and see all your rock samples and your core samples.
Yeah, Ryan, I know you're doing a ton with engagement and stuff on social media. What are your final thoughts on that?
Well, lately it seems to evolve every other month when on the communication strategies. I mean, on Facebook, it seems to be the community perspective is a lot more popular. And then on LinkedIn, it's more of the national perspective that seems to get a lot of people rolling. But, per the comments earlier, I think mine tours are an extremely underrated way of relating to folks and showing them how responsible mining is done. I know Eagle Mine and the UP of Michigan, they do a ton of mine tours for their local communities. They basically have an open door policy, from my understanding. The same goes with Talon Metals. If you want to go see their core samples, their core shed is always open for tours from certain times, Monday through Friday.
Oh, don't tell Jess that.
What's that?
Don't tell that to Jess.
Well,
it's on my list already.
Your road trip list, yeah.
Hey, you should come up. That'd be kind of fun. And then just from a social perspective, it varies each and every day. I know, the permitting timelines is definitely a huge topic. For example, the Department of Energy just added copper to the critical materials list, but, we have 6 proposed copper projects that are going after significant deposits of copper that, have been in the permitting process for over 6 years. Northvent's been in it for over 18. So those talking points, talking about how we need modern permitting reform is really it's what's popular right now to talk about. But to Jess's point earlier at the start of the show, not doing it in an attacking way, just saying, hey, look, if you're recognizing the importance of some of these minerals, let's get some of these projects that are coming through.
Well, and I just had when you were referencing the difference with LinkedIn, I just shared something on LinkedIn, which I see really rarely, which was a company this morning sharing their public input form, right? And I think that's something that we, even inside the industry, can do to kind of help from an NIMBYism perspective, is get more involved in the public comment phase, and really encouraging people to participate in that, because it does, correct me if I'm wrong, it does make a big difference. If that period is well utilized and you have educated folks on what's going on with the project, not just clicking form letters, though those are great too, I'm sure, but actively engaging in that public comment period. I think that's something that everybody can do, whether it's in their local backyard or just nationally, keeping an eye on that and engaging where you can.
And I think just to that, when you're going to put out a 43101, doing that in advance and incorporating that into the 43101, because any group that's going to politically oppose the project in any way, they're going to have that 43101 and they're going to pick you apart. So if you're saying X number of tons, they're going to extrapolate that to a tailings. But if you can do that and say, oh, okay, we think there's this much amount in advance, right? Before you publish it, maybe delay, take the time to do that. You can head those things off and maybe have a mitigation strategy in place so that there's not so much political opposition when they do get it. And they're not going to just see, oh, there's this technical report just got filed about this project, and they're applying for a permit in my area, and now my political action group is going to get is going to kind of go oppose this. But if you've engaged them before that has happened, you're more likely to have, at least to save yourself some pain, right? And I think obviously it's changing in the mindset of how they're playing these things.
And then to add to the community engagement, one thing that I've noticed that's becoming, I've only been in the mining industry for 5 years, but one thing that I've noticed shift in the past 1.5 to 2 years is a strong focus on tribal engagement as well. So if there's a local tribe in the area of a mine that you're trying to permit, or even just, an industrial project, but, if it's anything, whether it's a wood processing facility, whether it's a pipeline, tribal engagement seems to become increasingly more important each and every year.
Yeah, and great reference there. Marilyn had put in, if anybody missed it, some groups that are working with First Nations communities in Canada to develop their own projects as well.
Smart. Extremely smart.
Game-changing difference, again, from a business model perspective, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I know that's something we had kind of planned on touching on, but that'll be some other mining roundup, because that is a huge importance to the industry right now, for sure. Cool. I'm not seeing any questions. Tons of great insights and stuff. So thank you all for the comments and ideas and insights and everything. Any final insights? We do have to wrap it up, but I will put all of these great comments and insights from you all into a blog post, and of course they'll be on our monthly mining roundup replay on YouTube tomorrow as well. So, any final thoughts or insights from the team here?
I think you need to show off your shirt, Jess, as a final thought, right? I don't think you showed it.
I did not. I was wondering if anybody would notice my mining themed shirts. So the Montana Mining Association did just recently come out with a shirt. Graphically, it leaves a little to be desired, but I love the enthusiasm. So shout out to the Montana Mining Association. It says, "More mining in Montana. Yes, in my backyard, please."
That's
and
right.
on the back it says NIMBY. So shout out to the Montana Mining Association for the enthusiasm there.
I guess my parting thought would just be, again, another reminder that a lot of people in the mining industry work globally. We have friends globally. Everybody at this point, again, is connected to everybody else. Like, we are the world, right? That type of message. But I just think it's, everybody's backyard is our backyard at this point. So that I think is my kind of message. And if it's not happening in your community, it's happening in somebody's community. So you still need to be informed and educated and engaged, no matter where it's happening. It's just easier to keep an eye on it if it's around the block.
No, I get. Well, first off, I'm just really impressed with how Jess coordinated all this. So thank you, Jess, and you run the screen and everything. I know I couldn't be able to do that, so appreciate it. No, I guess the final thoughts is just, it's something that I consistently stay passionate on. There was one comment earlier talking about EVs and understanding what goes into these batteries, and it's usually nickel, depending on the chemical battery. Whether it's nickel, manganese, cobalt, copper wiring in EVs. Just having that understanding that if we're going to build EV manufacturing facilities here in the U.S., let's mine, refine, and process it here in the U.S. with our friends in Canada and increase that domestic production as much as possible. I probably have too much of a nationalistic approach on my thought process on this, but I think anytime you can have an opportunity to strengthen critical mineral supply chains or EV battery metal supply chains, is something that you should jump on, because, one thing that, the Inflation Reduction Act is great for renewables, but the issue is that, there's incentives in there to utilize materials domestically, but Canada and Australia also are applicable to that standard. So until we start bringing more mines online, like, we were talking earlier, I think Australia and Canada, the average timeline to permit a mine is 2 years. So the incentives that are in the Inflation Reduction Act, as good as they are, unless if we start bringing more mining projects online here in the US, our money's going to go to Australia and Canada before it starts circulating here. And so that's kind of one thing too, that I don't know how to conclude that, but I mean, that's kind of one thing that has been on my mind quite a bit the past year, ever actually since it's been passed, is like until we bring more mining projects here online, that money's going to go elsewhere.
Yeah,
that's a great point. And I think that just adding to that and trying to make sure I'm not replicating anything is my big takeaway just from this discussion is I think there's a lot of public education and just communication, right? And I think that I always like the phrase like live local, think global. I think that applies to NIMBYism and NIMBYism, and I think looking at this, is really having empathy for what someone else might be going through, even though you're not, if that's where it's being mined, and using that to guide your decision process, right? Because I think it's important to create this resiliency, and the jobs will come with it, right? I think there's a lot of jobs a lot of skills we need to redevelop, and in order to do that for our next generation, we really need to make this an attractive thing, and we need to better market, what this could look like, and create that future, right? And I think it comes from both sides, and it's going to require better communication from both sides and better understanding and better empathy, right? To really solve these problems, because we only have one planet, and we got to deal with what we got.
Or we're screwed.
Well, in today's Weekly Nugget, if you haven't read the Weekly Nugget yet, there is an article about living on the moon. So just a sneak peek. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Ryan, thank you for being our first ever special guest on this live stream. So appreciate that. And thank you again all for the engagement and the comments. If you have any further insights or anything like that, send us an email, let us know. And thank you all again for joining us.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.